You don't need to come back anymore. We've made our decision. This family will go on without you. My mother's voice echoed through my small apartment in Philadelphia, steady, cold, and clean in a way that did not sound like anger. It sounded like an announcement she had practiced in front of a mirror. No trembling. No choking back tears. Just 31 seconds enough to erase 27 years of me being the daughter, who always answered the phone, first always sent money before asking why, always smiled through dinners I had quietly paid for. I sat frozen on my bed, my laptop still open on my lap. My job was to see danger before it arrived. And yet that night danger entered my life through the voice of the woman who had given birth to me. If you have ever been taken for granted by the people closest to you even after sacrificing so much, comment, I understand below. And if you want to hear more family stories filled with twists like this, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next part. My name is Amelia Carter. I was 27 years old. It was a Tuesday evening in October. Outside the window, Philadelphia was cold and gray. The phone on my nightstand vibrated once, then went silent. A missed call from my mother. My mother, Diane Carter, rarely called just to ask if I was okay. She usually sent short messages. Call me. Transfer this for me. Handle this, please. Those sentences never felt like requests. They felt like orders wrapped in the word family. I pressed play on the voicemail. Then I listened to it again. The first time I thought I had missed something. The second time I waited for an explanation. Why? After what? What had I done wrong? But there was nothing, no reason, no question. I opened the family group chat. The old group was called the Carters, where my mother sent photos of stew, my father sent pictures of birds in the yard, and Chloe showed off her new nails. I was no longer in it. I had been removed from the group. Even the name had been changed. Only one word remained. Us. I stared at that word for a long time. So I was no longer part of us. I was the extra piece, the name that could be erased with one tap. For the first few minutes, my old instinct rose up. Call back. Apologize. Ask what I had done wrong. Promise to fix it. That was how I had lived since I was 14. But that night, my finger stopped over my mother's name. I opened the message box and typed one word. Okay. Then I sent it. My mother did not reply. That silence told me everything. She was waiting for me to panic, waiting for me to beg, waiting for me to return to the role of the good daughter, the daughter who would blame herself just to earn a seat again in the house she was paying for. But there was one thing she did not know. From the moment I pressed send on the word, okay, I was no longer asking for their permission to leave. I was giving myself permission to stop. After sending that message, I placed my phone face down on the nightstand, as if not seeing the screen would make my mother's voice stop existing in this room. But the truth did not disappear that easily. It was still there, sitting silently beside me, colder than the empty space outside the window. I looked around my studio apartment. A small desk pushed against the wall, a low bookshelf sagging in the middle, under the weight of too many files, a sink with the coffee mug I had left there that morning. Everything looked cruelly normal. There was no one standing in front of me to say that I had just been cut out of my own family. There was only me, a silent phone, and the feeling that someone had pulled the last thread connecting me to my childhood out of my chest. I thought I would cry right away. But the tears did not come. What came first was emptiness, like hearing something so painful that your body has not yet understood. It is pain. I got up, walked into the kitchen, drank half a glass of water, and then realized my hands were shaking. Upstairs, my neighbor turned on the television. The fake laughter of a comedy show echoed through the ceiling. A family had just erased me from the group chat. My mother had just told me not to come home. And somewhere above me, an invisible crowd was still laughing, right on cue. I returned to the bed and opened my laptop. On the screen was the risk assessment I had been working on for a client. I stared at the red warning lines and suddenly let out a very quiet laugh. I was paid to recognize danger in other people's finances, yet it had taken me almost my entire life to recognize the pattern inside my own home. Every time they needed money, I was family. Every time I needed protection, I was expected to be understanding. Every time Chloe cried, the whole house bent down to comfort her. Every time I stayed silent, they called it maturity. That night, for the first time, I did not call back. I did not send another message. I did not explain myself. I let the word okay sit there like a door I had locked from my side. Near midnight, the sadness finally began to sink in. It was not loud. It only made me remember all the times I had sat at the end of the dinner table, watching my mother give the best piece of food to Chloe. I remembered my father lowering his head into the newspaper whenever my mother said something that hurt me. But that night, in that small room in Philadelphia, I understood something slowly and clearly. Some people never see you not because you are not good enough, but because they decided your role a long time ago. And my role in the Carter family had never been to be loved. I was only the person who kept everything from falling apart. I could not sleep. Not because I kept replaying my mother's voicemail. I only listened to it twice, then stopped. What kept me awake was the feeling that someone had just turned on a light in a room I had lived in for far too long without realizing how dark it was. Close to 1 a.m, I pulled my laptop closer, opened a new file, and named it Carter Family Financial Obligations. When my emotions became too chaotic, I turned to numbers because numbers did not know how to pretend to love you, and they did not know how to cry in order to avoid responsibility. I created 4 columns: expense, monthly amount, duration, total. Then I began typing. The mortgage on the suburban house my mother called the heart of the family. $1,850 a month for 3 years. That alone came to more than $66,000. Health insurance for my mother and father. $640 a month for more than 2.5 years. Chloe's car payment, the white SUV she posted online, with the caption blessed. $380 a month for 14 straight months. Then came the expenses that were always urgent. My father's back surgery. The roof repairs. Chloe's apartment deposit when she moved out. Then the moving costs when she moved back in. My mother's dental bill, the one she forgot to mention, until it was nearly sent to collections. Each line appeared like a small cut. Not one line said thank you. Not one line said Amelia needs to live too. It was only money, leaving my account steady and silent, like blood flowing from a wound I had grown so used to that I no longer felt the pain. By nearly 3 a.m, the spreadsheet was finished. I scrolled down to the final cell. The total appeared in bold at the corner of the screen. $143,214. I stared at that number for a long time. It was more than a year of my salary, more than the savings I had never been able to build, more than every vacation I had canceled on myself, every dinner invitation I had turned down. But the thing that chilled me was not the amount of money. What chilled me was that I had proof for all of it. I opened the cloud folder, where I always kept my records. Bills, bank statements, loan agreements, mortgage documents, the deed showing shared ownership of the house, the trust documents from my grandmother stating clearly that I was the sole trustee. Each paper appeared like a brick beneath a house that had begun to tremble. They had just told me to leave, but they had forgotten that my name, my money, and my signature were the things keeping that house standing. For the first time in years, I did not feel small anymore. I felt awake. And as the printer began pushing out page after page of evidence, I knew that night was not the night I lost my family. It was the night I found myself again. The next morning, Philadelphia was covered in a thick shade of gray. My apartment felt cold even though the heater was still running. I made coffee, but I did not drink it. There was only one thought in my head. If they had decided to cut me out of the family, what else had they done before that? I logged into the shared account used to pay the house bills. It was an account I had created to keep everything organized. My money went in. The mortgage, electricity, water, and insurance payments went out. My mother had once said it would be easier for everyone that way. Back then I believed her. Now that sentence sounded like a trap. The account dashboard appeared. It only took a few seconds for me to notice something wrong. The contact email had been changed. My address was no longer there. In its place was Chloe's email. The timestamp was clear. 2 days before the voicemail. I sat up straight. Not after the voicemail. Not because my mother had gotten angry and Chloe had rushed to follow her lead. Before it. That meant when my mother said, "We've made our decision," that decision had not begun with emotion. It had begun with an action inside the system. I kept digging through my inbox. Beneath dozens of work emails, I found a notice from the title company handling the house records. The subject line confirmed a request to modify ownership rights. I opened the attachment. At the bottom of the form were 2 signature lines. One for Diane Carter, primary owner. One for Amelia Carter, co-owner. Both had been signed. I zoomed in on my signature. For the first moment, a chill ran down my spine because it looked close. The slant was almost right. The size was almost right. Even the final stroke in Carter had been copied. But one detail was wrong. The first letter of my name always had a small open loop because I signed quickly out of habit. This one was closed neat and too controlled. That was not my signature. I reread the submission section. The person who filed the documents was Chloe Carter, authorized family representative. I had never authorized her. I had never agreed to remove my name from the house. I had never signed anything. Piece by piece, the truth began to lock into place. First, Chloe changed the contact email on the account. Then she submitted a form with a forged signature to remove me from ownership. Then my mother sent the voicemail telling me not to come home anymore. My family had not fallen apart in one heated minute. They had cleared the path first. They wanted me out of the paperwork before I had a chance to realize I still had the right to stand there. I opened a new folder and named it Evidence. For the first time, I did not ask why they had done it. I only wondered how quickly they had forgotten what I did for a living. I was a risk analyst. I was paid to spot fraud before other people called it an accident. And Chloe had just left traces everywhere. To understand why I let things go that far, you have to go back to a very old summer when I was 14 and Chloe was only 10. It was the last afternoon before summer break. My mother called both of us down to the kitchen, while my father sat at the head of the table holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold present, only to confirm the decision not to discuss it. My mother said Chloe was going to a 4-week art camp. Chloe had begged for it all month, and my mother said a child's passion needed to be nurtured. Chloe squealed and threw her arms around my mother's neck, while my mother smiled as if the entire kitchen had lit up because of my sister's joy. I had a piece of paper in my hand, too. It was an invitation to join a math program at the community school, free for students whose grades were high enough. I had hidden it in my backpack for almost a week. When Chloe ran upstairs to brag to her friends, I placed the paper in front of my mother. "Mom, I got accepted into a summer program, too." My mother barely glanced at it. "You can't go, Amelia. In the mornings you need to stay home and watch your sister before Chloe goes to camp. In the afternoons you can make her something to eat, do the laundry, and tidy up a little. You're the older sister. You understand." The sentence "you understand" sounded so gentle that it closed in front of me like a door. I wanted to say the program was free. I wanted to say I had dreams too. I wanted to ask why Chloe's passion needed to be nurtured while my ability was only useful when it served someone else. But my father was still looking down at his coffee. My mother had already turned back to Chloe's camp schedule. So I nodded. From that day on, I learned a lesson. No one ever said out loud. Chloe was allowed to want. I was expected to understand. Chloe could cry when she was disappointed. I had to stay silent when something I had hoped for was taken away from me. Chloe needed to be protected from pressure. I was praised for being strong every time I carried more responsibility without objecting. That fall, I made the honor roll. My mother only said good. Keep it up. Someone in this family will need to make money someday. No hug. No words of pride. Just a career forecast placed on the shoulders of a child. That same year, Chloe failed a few classes. The whole house revolved around her as if the world had collapsed. My father took her out for ice cream. My mother sat beside her bed, stroking her hair, and saying, "You are not your grades, sweetheart." I stood in the hallway and heard everything. No one had ever said that to me. Maybe because I had not failed enough to be comforted. Maybe because I had done well too early, so they forgot that the one who does well can hurt too. Years later, when I told my mother I was tired, she answered very quickly, "You're the strong one, Amelia. Chloe needs me more." I carried that sentence in my chest for an entire decade. And it was not until the night of that voicemail that I finally understood. In the Carter family, strong was never a compliment. It was an excuse for them not to take care of me. Years after that summer, I received my first paycheck at a financial consulting firm in Philadelphia. I remember sitting in a coffee shop near the office, staring at the amount in my account and feeling proud of myself. I thought that finally I could begin a life of my own. Pay down my student loans. Buy a better coat. Maybe spend a weekend in Boston just to see the ocean. That feeling lasted less than 4 hours. That evening, my mother called. My father had severe back pain after a temporary job insurance would not cover enough, and the hospital needed a partial payment immediately. My mother said she did not know what to do. She was not crying, but there was something in the silence between her words that made me instantly feel guilty for having money. I transferred the money that same night. 3 weeks later, Chloe needed the deposit for her first apartment. I asked very softly, as if I were afraid of upsetting my mother, "Doesn't Chloe have any savings at all?" The line went silent. Then my mother said, "She is your sister Amelia. She is just starting her life. How can you be so calculating with her?" I sent the money. My student loan sat untouched, the interest growing day by day. No one asked how I was eating. No one asked whether I had enough for rent. They only knew Amelia was fine. Amelia could always handle it. During my first year of work, I sent home nearly $14,000, one small amount after another, one emergency after another one, promise of just this once after another. But just this once always knew how to return the following month under a different name. Then, 3 years before the voicemail, my mother called with a bigger dream. She and my father wanted to buy a house in the suburbs, with 3 bedrooms, a wide backyard, and a quiet neighborhood. My mother said it would be the Carter family home, a place both daughters could return to someday. But my parents' credit was too damaged for a bank loan. Medical debt, a car payment that had once been late, several bills sent to collections. No one would lend to them unless someone signed with them. "You only need to co-sign," my mother said. "Your name will be on the papers. This is a family home." I signed. No private lawyer. No protective agreement. No conditions at all except the foolish belief that family would not take advantage of my signature. From that month on, $1,850 left my account as steadily as a clock. Chloe moved into the largest bedroom. She painted the walls, cream-hung string lights, and posted photos online with the caption, "Home Sweet Home." Every time I came to visit, my mother pulled out the sleeper sofa in the family room and said, "You can stay here for now. You won't be here long anyway." I was paying for a house where I had to sleep on the couch. And the most painful part was that while lying on that sofa, listening to Chloe laugh in the largest bedroom, I still told myself I should be grateful that I was allowed to come home. Grandma Margaret died 4 years before the voicemail. Lung cancer took her so quickly that before the family could fully believe it, the armchair beside the window was already empty. But even in her final weeks, her mind stayed sharp as a blade. She remembered every debt my mother had, every time Chloe borrowed money and forgot to pay it back, and every time I quietly washed the dishes after dinner. 2 months before she died, she revised the family trust. $86,000 was set aside for education and medical needs. The sole trustee was me. Not my mother. Not Chloe. Me. The day the lawyer read the will, my mother's face went stiff. In the car on the way home, she said very quietly, "Your grandmother was old. She didn't understand how families work. That money should have been decided by all of us." I answered, "I'm only following what Grandma put in the documents." My mother did not reply. Her silence did not sound like acceptance. It sounded like a promise to return to the matter later. For the next 3 years, the trust remained untouched. I used it only for its intended purpose. One payment for my father's medication. One payment for my mother's hospital bill. Everything had receipts, signatures, and records. I thought that as long as I was transparent, no one would have reason to doubt me. I was wrong again. Chloe called one evening in August. Her voice was softer than usual, so sweet that I immediately knew something was wrong. She said she wanted to open an online clothing resale shop. She needed $15,000 from Grandma's trust to buy inventory. I asked where her business plan was. She sent me a supplier link and a few screenshots. I said no. Not because I wanted to make things difficult for her. Because the terms of the trust were very clear: education and medical needs. There was no line for Chloe's unplanned business dream. The other end of the line went silent for a few seconds, then she began to cry. Not the sound of someone truly hurt, but the kind of crying she had used since childhood whenever she wanted the whole family to turn toward her. Just as I expected, my mother called less than 10 minutes later. "Your grandmother would have wanted to help Chloe," my mother said. "Grandma wrote down exactly what she wanted," I replied. From that day on, Chloe told relatives that I was using Grandma's money to control the family. She said I was selfish, cold, and obsessed with paperwork. I heard it from a cousin, but I did not defend myself. I was too tired of proving I was not the villain in a story someone else had already written. But 2 months before the voicemail, Chloe called again. This time her voice was gentler. She asked about my work, asked whether I felt lonely in Philadelphia, then said one sentence that would haunt me. "You just need to step away from the trust and the house documents, Amelia. Everything would be easier for everyone." Back then, I did not know she had just spoken her plan out loud. If you have ever seen a family member use tears to hide greed, comment number 1 if you think Amelia should protect the trust. And subscribe to the channel to see how the truth comes out. On Wednesday morning, I walked into the office with the face of someone who had slept on broken glass. I tried to go straight to my desk, keeping my head low enough so no one would ask questions. But Daniel Brooks saw me before I even had the chance to open my laptop. Daniel was 8 years older than me, a senior CPA on the risk audit team. He did not talk much, and he never liked pushing into other people's private lives. But he had a kind of calm that made you believe that if the ship were sinking, he would still know where the emergency exit was. I made coffee in the break room. When I came back, Daniel was standing in front of my desk. My laptop screen was still showing the Carter family spreadsheet. The total at the bottom of the page was clear, bold, and cold. He looked at me then, at that number. Amelia, he said very quietly, is this money a client owes or money you've paid to someone? I could have lied. I could have said it was a model file, a test data set, but my throat tightened. Maybe because I was too tired of protecting people who had never protected me. Maybe because Daniel's question held no cheap curiosity. Only concern. I told him the shortened version, my mother's voicemail, the renamed group chat, the house, the trust, the more than $143,000. I did not cry. My voice was so even that it scared me. Daniel did not interrupt. He did not say every family has problems. He did not tell me to be more understanding. He did not tell me to call my mother and talk it out. He only stayed silent for a while, as if he were placing every detail into the right drawer. Then he said, I've been where you're standing. Different people, different situation, but the same structure. I looked up. My father once used my name to take out a loan. When I found out, the whole family told me not to make it a big deal. I called home, explained, negotiated. The only thing I wish I had done sooner was call a lawyer. He took a yellow sticky note, wrote down a name and a phone number, then slid it across to me. Margaret Ellis, real estate and trust attorney. She helped me keep my house when my own family tried to take it. I held the note. It was so light it almost felt meaningless, but in my hand it felt like a rope thrown down at the exact right moment. I don't know if I want to sue anyone, I said. Daniel shook his head. Calling a lawyer doesn't mean you want to destroy your family. It means you want to know your rights before they tell you a different story. That sentence stayed with me all day. Before leaving the office, I tucked the note into the innermost pocket of my wallet. 7 hours later, when I discovered the forged signature on the house documents, I finally understood that Daniel had not just given me a phone number. He had given me my first way out. The next morning, I called Margaret Ellis before work. I only said 3 phrases. Co-owner of a house, a signature that was not mine, and documents still pending. A low, clear female voice came through the line. Ems. Carter, if your signature was forged on real estate documents, bring every record you have to my office today. Margaret's office was inside a brown brick building near Rittenhouse Square. Inside there was no fake warmth. No soft-colored paintings, no cushioned chairs, designed for clients to sink into their tears. Only tall bookshelves, a cold glass desk, and a firm chair that made whoever sat in it straighten their back. I placed the file on her desk. The mortgage. The deed. The email from the title company. The spreadsheet of every payment I had made. The notice showing the shared account email had been changed to Chloe's. And the form with the signature I had never written. Margaret put on her glasses and read every page. Sometimes she used a pencil to underline a date, an email address, or a line of electronic confirmation. I sat across from her with both hands in my lap. Finally, she placed my real signature from the mortgage agreement beside the signature on the ownership modification form. She studied them for a long time. Then she turned both pages toward me. Do you see this? I nodded. The first letter of my name. I never closed the loop like that. Exactly, she said. And not only that, the pen pressure is uneven. The spacing between your first and last name is wrong too. Whoever signed this copied it carefully, but this is not a natural signature. Hearing that sent a chill down my spine. When a lawyer says your signature has been forged, the betrayal suddenly takes on a legal shape. It is no longer just a family matter. Margaret removed her glasses. You have 2 problems, and 1 advantage. The first problem is that someone used your identity to file real estate documents. The second problem is that the house has a pending refinance transaction without your genuine consent. Both are serious. She paused for a moment. Your advantage is that you are still a co-owner, a co-signer on the loan, and the sole trustee of the trust. No one can legally push you out of those things without your real signature. I asked, what happens if I stop? Margaret looked directly at me. If you stop paying, stop signing, and stop serving as the foundation, the entire structure they are leaning on will collapse by itself. Not because you destroyed it, because it was never standing on its own. For years, I had been afraid of becoming the person who broke the family apart. But for the first time, someone told me that a house held up by one person's sacrifice had already been cracked for a long time. Before I left the office, Margaret added, "A forged signature on property documents can become a criminal matter. You do not need to decide that today, but you do need to know that you are not powerless." I stepped out onto the street. For the first time, I did not feel like the daughter who had been thrown away. I felt like the only person still holding the key. On Friday afternoon, I returned to Margaret's office with a notebook full of questions. On the way there, I kept wondering whether I was being too cold. A part of me could still hear my mother's voice, saying that a good daughter did not push her parents into hardship. But the part of me that had seen the forged signature was no longer naive enough to call silence loyalty. Margaret placed 3 authorization forms in front of me. She explained each step in the calm voice of someone who had seen too many families turn greed into morality. First, she would notify the bank and the title company that the signature on the ownership modification form was not mine. Attached would be the signature comparison, my statement, and a request to freeze every transaction related to the house until the investigation was complete. Second, I would use my authority as sole trustee to freeze Grandma's entire trust. No withdrawals. No transfers. No distributions. From that moment on, my mother and Chloe could not touch a single dollar without valid documentation. Third, I would cancel the automatic mortgage payments and the insurance payments I had still been making for the house. I was not the primary borrower. My mother was the one listed first on the loan. I was only the person who had kept it alive with my salary. I looked at the pen on the desk. It was small and harmless, but I knew one signature today would make it impossible for things to go back to the way they had been. What if they lose the house? I asked. Margaret did not look away. Amelia, they told you to leave. You are leaving? If the house collapses when you remove your hand, the problem is not your hand. It is the structure that forced you to hold it up for too long. I signed. This time, the stroke of my pen was slow and clear, nothing like the forged signature Chloe had tried to imitate. This was my real signature. And that real signature was no longer being used to save them. On Monday morning, Margaret sent 3 emails. One to the bank. One to the trust administrator. One to my mother's lawyer, stating that all communication had to go through the office of Margaret Ellis. By the end of the day, the bank responded. The refinance file had been frozen. The ownership modification form had been flagged for fraud. No changes would be made to the deed until the investigation was complete. An hour later, the trust administrator confirmed that the trust had been locked. Grandma's $86,000 stayed exactly where she had wanted it to stay. I sat in my car in the company parking garage, my phone glowing in my hand. My hands were shaking, but not because I was afraid. It was the dizzying feeling of someone who had spent her life acting as the emergency brake, finally letting go of the lever. In the next few days, my mother would learn that the mortgage would no longer be paid. Chloe would learn that the trust would not open for her anymore. My father would learn that his silence was not enough to pay the bills. I started the car and drove out of the garage. Cold wind poured in through the lowered window. For the first time in years, I was no longer keeping my family from falling. I let them touch the ground themselves. It took exactly 51 hours for the Carter family to realize the ground beneath them had disappeared. On Thursday morning, I was reading a risk report when my phone began vibrating nonstop on my desk. Not one call. Call after call after call, as if dialing enough times would somehow turn me back into the old Amelia. I left the phone face down until I finished the final paragraph. Only then did I turn it over. 46 missed calls. My mother had called 19 times. My father had called 8. Chloe had called 14. The rest came from an unknown number. I later learned belonged to my mother's lawyer. Messages were stacked on top of each other. My mother told me to call her back immediately. Chloe asked what I had done to the bank because the refinance file had been frozen. My father wrote that my mother was very upset and that we needed to talk about the house. I read every line, but my heart no longer raced the way it once had. There had been a time when one message from my mother saying, "Call me," would have made me drop everything. There had been a time when Chloe saying, "I need you," would have made me open my banking app before even asking what she needed. But this time I saw it clearly. They were not calling because they missed me. They were calling because the system had stopped running. An email from my mother's lawyer arrived that afternoon. He said his client was facing serious issues concerning the house and hoped I would cooperate. The final line said, "We have a serious problem." I almost laughed. They had a problem. I had simply stopped being the free solution. Chloe did not wait for the lawyer. That evening, she kept texting. At first, it was blame. Then softness. Then the familiar sentence arrived. "You are being unbelievably selfish, Amelia. You are hurting the whole family because of your ego." Not one apology. No mention of the voicemail. No mention of the forged signature. Only the same old performance. Chloe was the wounded one, and I was the cold one. The next morning, relatives started messaging. Aunt Helen said my mother was falling apart. Uncle Robert said not to let money destroy the family. A cousin I barely knew told me I should call Chloe. Then I saw Chloe's Facebook post. When blood turns its back on you over money, you finally learn who truly loves family. Praying for healing. I wanted to post the spreadsheet. I wanted to post the forged signature. I wanted to expose everything. But I remembered Daniel's words. Do not fight them on their stage. Bring the truth into the right room. If you were in my place, would you stay silent and keep the evidence, or expose everything immediately? Comment 1, if you would wait for the right moment. Comment 2, if you would reveal it all at once. And subscribe to the channel if you want to see the moment Chloe has to face her own lie. I closed. Facebook forwarded the messages to Margaret and wrote only one sentence. I'm ready for the meeting. Margaret scheduled the meeting for Friday afternoon at her office. The people attending would be me, my mother, my father, Chloe, my mother's lawyer, and Margaret. When I read the confirmation email, I stared at each name as if I were looking at characters in a case where I was both the victim and the person expected to present the evidence. Margaret set 3 rules. No one was allowed to yell. Every accusation had to be supported by documents. And I would speak first without being interrupted. My mother's lawyer agreed very quickly. That told me they needed this meeting more than I did. They needed my signature, my money, and my cooperation. I only needed the truth placed on the table. That night I prepared the files the way I would prepare a risk report for the biggest client of my life. The first file was the spreadsheet, showing $143,214 every payment, every date, every transfer record. The second file showed my real signature beside the forged one. The third file contained the emails proving Chloe had changed the shared account information before the voicemail. The fourth file was the timeline from the deed modification form to the changed email to my mother's voicemail, to me being removed from the family group chat. I placed everything inside a black folder. In the innermost pocket was the USB drive containing Chloe's call from 2 months earlier. The sentence "you just need to step away from the trust and the house documents" was inside it, silent and waiting for the right moment like a blade carefully wrapped in cloth. I was not sure I would play it. Part of me still hoped Chloe would tell the truth first. Hoped my mother would ask me one kind question. Hoped my father would look directly at the problem instead of saying his usual line about talking to my mother later. But hope was no longer a shelter by then. It was only something I acknowledged, then set aside. Before I went to sleep, Daniel texted me. "Are you ready?" I looked at the file on the table beside my bed. "The documents are ready. My hands are still shaking, but I'm not backing down anymore." He replied, "You don't need to convince them to love you. You only need to make sure the truth is not buried anymore." I put the phone down. Outside the window, the city was quieter than usual. The yellow light fell across the wall, stretching the shadow of the folder into something long, dark, and sharp. That night I barely slept. Not because I was afraid of them. I was afraid of the moment I would have to look into my mother's eyes and understand that maybe she only regretted getting caught, not hurting me. On Friday afternoon, I arrived at Margaret's office 10 minutes early. The conference room was on the third floor. On the table were 6 leather chairs, a pitcher of water, and several upside-down glasses. No one was there except Margaret and me, but the room already felt heavy, as if the trial had begun long before we entered. I placed the black folder in front of me and lined up the edges of the papers perfectly. If I could not control my heartbeat, at least I could control the documents. The door opened just before 2 o'clock. My mother walked in first. Diane Carter wore a dark blue blouse, her hair pinned neatly, her chin raised high. She looked at me for 1 second, then looked down at the folder. My father followed behind her, his shoulders slightly bent. He said nothing. Chloe came in last. She wore a pale pink cardigan, her eyes red, her lips trembling. If I had not known her, I might have thought she had been crying because she was hurt. But I had known Chloe long enough to understand that some tears were prepared more carefully than testimony. Margaret began in a calm voice. "Amelia will speak first. No one interrupts." I opened the folder. "I want to start with a number." I pushed the spreadsheet to the center of the table. $143,214. This is the total amount I have spent on this family over 6 years. Mortgage payments, insurance, Chloe's car, hospital bills, house repairs, deposits, medical expenses. Every item has documentation. My mother looked down at the page. The confidence on her face cracked by a tiny line. My father lifted a hand to his forehead. Chloe did not look at the spreadsheet. She looked at my mother. I took out the second document. This is my real signature on the mortgage agreement. Beside it is the signature on the form requesting to remove me from the deed. I did not sign this form. I did not authorize anyone to sign for me. The file was submitted by Chloe Carter as the family representative. The air in the room changed. My mother turned to Chloe. "Chloe, what is this?" Chloe reacted instantly. "I didn't do anything. She's making this up. Amelia always turns herself into the victim so she can control everyone." I did not raise my voice. "Chloe." Just one word, but she stopped. I took the USB drive from the inner pocket of the folder. Margaret plugged it into the laptop. This is a call between Chloe and me 2 months before the voicemail. There is a recording notice at the beginning. The file can be verified. Chloe's face went pale. I pressed play. Her voice came through the speaker, soft, sweet, and terrifyingly familiar. "You just need to step away from the trust and the house documents, Amelia. Everything would be easier for everyone." I stopped the file. No one said anything. Those 15 seconds of silence were longer than all the years I had spent trying to explain myself. My mother stared at the speaker as if it had betrayed her. My father closed his eyes. My mother's lawyer set his pen down. Chloe looked at my mother, searching for her last lifeline. "Mom, you believe me, right?" She edited it. "She hates me." But this time, my mother did not look at her. She looked at the spreadsheet, at the forged signature, at all the things Chloe's tears could not erase. I closed the folder. You may not have known about the forged signature, I said, but you knew about the voicemail. You knew you removed me from the family. You knew you never asked me for the truth. My mother's voice shrank. Amelia, I didn't know she did that. I believe you didn't know everything. But you chose not to know. I stood up. Starting today, the trust will be transferred to a professional management company. I am withdrawing from every financial obligation. The house has 60 days to be handled. I will not pay another dollar. I looked at Chloe one last time. I don't hate you, but I no longer trust you. As I walked toward the door, my father called my name. I did not turn around. 60 days, Dad. Use them well. 72 hours after the meeting, everything began falling in the direction. Truth always pulls things down. The bank sent an official notice. The refinance file was permanently canceled because of suspected signature fraud. If my mother wanted to keep the house, she would have to prove her ability to pay on her own or find a new qualified co-signer. No one appeared. My mother's credit could not carry the loan. My father had never had a credit score strong enough to save anything except his own silence. Chloe, the person who once said everything would be easier if I stepped away from the paperwork, could not step into the place I had been standing. For the first time, the Carter family saw the space I left behind, not at the dinner table, not in the group chat, but in every line of the bank documents. Grandma's trust was transferred to a professional management company in Philadelphia within a week. I signed the papers removing myself as trustee, but Grandma's terms remained unchanged. Education and medical needs. No exceptions. No vague business projects. No crying over the phone. No, because we are family used as a password to open the safe. I heard from Margaret that Chloe tried calling the trust company twice. The first time she said she was the direct heir. The second time she said my mother urgently needed money. Both times the answer was the same. Please provide valid documentation. Those 3 words did what I had not been able to do for years. They made Chloe stop. 30 days later, my parents' health insurance lapsed because I had canceled the automatic payments. My mother had to go onto the marketplace and buy a new plan herself. She called me once not to apologize, only to ask if the premiums were really that high. I stared at the phone for a long time and did not answer. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I was no longer the help desk for consequences she had once called family. 10 days after the meeting, my mother's lawyer withdrew from the matter. His letter politely stated that there were serious factual differences between his client's claims and the actual records. Margaret read that sentence to me over the phone, then said, in less polite words, he realized someone had lied. I did not post anything online. I did not expose Chloe. I did not send the spreadsheet to Aunt Helen. But the story still leaked in its own way. A cousin messaged me to ask whether it was true that there had been a forged signature. Aunt Helen stopped leaving heart comments under Chloe's posts. The people who had once told me not to let money destroy the family began to fall silent. The house was listed for sale after 6 weeks. I signed the papers releasing my name from the deed this time with my real signature. I did not take any share of the money. Not because they deserved that, but because I wanted to walk away as lightly as possible. It was not a victory. It was the first time I stopped holding up a house that had never made room for me. 3 months after the meeting, Philadelphia entered winter through gray, cold mornings. I sat in a coffee shop near the office, my laptop open in front of me, but I was not typing anything. Outside the glass window, people hurried past shoulders, tucked into their coats, hands wrapped around hot coffee. Everything was so ordinary. It was almost forgettable. And that was exactly what made me want to cry. For the first time in my adult life, ordinary did not cost me exhaustion. The mortgage payment that used to leave my account every month now sat in my savings. I had an emergency fund. I began paying down my student loan faster. I booked a flight to Oregon simply because I wanted to see the ocean in winter. When I clicked confirm on the ticket, I sat still for a long time, not because I regretted the money, but because I realized I had never allowed myself to want something without apologizing to anyone. Chloe and I no longer spoke. Sometimes I saw her name appear on social media through mutual friends. A post about new beginnings. A beautiful smiling photo. A quote about letting go of negative energy. In the past, those things would have made me angry. Now, I simply scrolled past them. That emptiness was not cold. It was clean. My mother called once. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. She asked if I was doing well. I said yes. She went quiet, then said, "That's good." No request for money. No blame. No mention of Chloe. It was not healing yet. It was only a ceasefire. And for me, that was enough. My father texted on my birthday. "Happy birthday, Amelia." That was all. No long speech, no promises. But it was the first time in years he had remembered my day without anyone reminding him. I looked at the message, then replied, "Thank you, Dad. I am not telling this story, so you will hate my family. I am telling it because somewhere, someone is staring at a transfer screen, sending money they cannot afford to someone who has never said thank you, then telling themselves, it's okay. They are family. I used to say that too. But family is not a blank check. Love does not mean allowing other people to spend your entire life. Boundaries are not betrayal. Boundaries are the truth spoken out loud when you no longer want to erase yourself just so others can feel comfortable. If this story reminds you of a time when you had to save yourself, leave a comment below. And if you believe boundaries are not selfish, subscribe to the channel to hear more stories about justice that comes late, but still comes deservedly. I do not know what the Carter family will look like a year from now. Maybe there will be a Thanksgiving dinner I attend. Maybe there will not. Maybe my mother will truly understand. Maybe my father will learn to speak up. Maybe Chloe will never admit what she did. But for the first time, their answer no longer decides my life. I once thought being cast out of my family meant losing everything. It turned out to be the day I walked out of a house that had never made room for me and finally found my way back to myself.